My Vision of the Destruction of America by A. Allen, July 4th, 1954, atop the Empire State Building.
Is this vision for today? God gave Allen these images July 4th, 1954. He showed him death by chemical warfare mixed with toxic smoke. But God's people will escape his coming wrath against evil.
It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Yes, the manipulators of the Matrix have major plans for planetary mayhem. Many of those plans are, of course, already ongoing. Heat and smoke are smothering most of the U.S., putting lives at risk. Multiple sources for that headline. And for those that think it's just smoke they're inhaling with every breath they take, think again. Geoengineeringwatch.org has captured time-lapse film footage of blanket aerosol spraying operations being conducted directly over wildfire smoke canopies. Why? Any that are still trying to convince themselves that the aerosol spraying above already highly toxic smoke canopies is somehow benevolent, time to seriously recheck your reality.
As I stood atop the Empire State Building, I could see the Statue of Liberty illuminating the gateway to the New World. Here, spread before me like an animated map, is an area 60 or 80 miles in diameter. I was amazed that the Spirit of the Lord should move me so, there atop the Empire State Building. Why would I feel such a surge of His Spirit and power there? Suddenly I heard the voice of the Lord. It was as clear and as distinct as a voice could be. It seemed to come from the very midst of the giant telescope, but when I looked at the telescope, I knew it hadn't come from there, but directly from heaven. The voice said, 2 Chronicles 16, verse 9, "For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth, to show Himself strong on behalf of those whose hearts are perfect toward Him. Herein thou hast done foolishly. Therefore, from henceforth thou shalt have wars." Immediately, when I heard the voice of the Lord, I knew this was a quotation of Scripture, but never before had a thing come to me so forcibly by the power of the Spirit. The ticking of the telescope stopped. The man before me had used his dime's worth. As he stepped away, I knew that I was next. As I stepped to the telescope and dropped in my dime, immediately the ticking started again. This ticking was an automatic clock which would allow me to use the telescope for a limited time only. As I swung the telescope to the north, suddenly the Spirit of God came upon me in a way I had never thought of before. Seemingly, in the Spirit, I was entirely caught away. I knew that the telescope itself had nothing to do with the distance which I was suddenly enabled to see, for I seemed to see things far beyond the range of the telescope, even on a bright, clear day. It was simply that God had chosen this time to reveal these things to me, for as I looked through the telescope, it was not Manhattan Island that I saw, but a far larger view. That morning, much of the view was impaired by fog, but suddenly, as the Spirit of the Lord came upon me, the fog seemed to clear until it seemed that I could see for thousands of miles. That which I was looking upon was not Manhattan Island. It was all of the North American continent, spread out before me as a map is spread upon a table. It was not the East River and the Hudson River that I saw on the other side, but the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. And instead of the Statue of Liberty standing there in the bay on her small island, I saw her standing far out in the Gulf of Mexico. She was between me and the United States. I suddenly realized that the telescope had nothing to do with what I was seeing, but that it was a vision coming directly from God. And to prove this to myself, I took my eyes away from the telescope so that I was no longer looking through the lens, but the same scene remained before me. There, clear and distinct, lay all the North American continent with all its great cities. To the north lay the Great Lakes. Far to the northeast was New York City. I could see Seattle and Portland far to the northwest. Down the west coast there were San Francisco and Los Angeles. Closer in the foreground lay New Orleans at the center of the Gulf Coast area. I could see the great towering ranges of the Rocky Mountains and trace with my eye the Continental Divide. All this and more I could see spread out before me as a great map upon a table. As I looked, suddenly from the sky I saw a giant hand reach down. The gigantic hand was reaching out toward the Statue of Liberty. In a moment, her gleaming torch was torn from her hand, and in it instead was placed a cup, and I saw protruding from that great cup a giant sword, shining as if a great light had been turned upon its glistening edge. Never before had I seen such a sharp, glistening, dangerous sword. It seemed to threaten all the world. As the great cup was placed in the hand of the Statue of Liberty, I heard these words, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, Drink ye and be drunken, and spew and fall and rise no more, because of the sword which I will send." As I heard these words, I recognized them as a quotation from Jeremiah 25, verse 27. I was amazed to hear the Statue of Liberty speak out in reply, "I will not drink." Then, as the voice of thunder, I heard again the voice of the Lord saying, "Ye shall certainly drink." Jeremiah 25:28. Then suddenly the giant hand forced the cup to the lips of the Statue of Liberty, and she became powerless to defend herself. The mighty hand of God forced her to drink every drop from the cup. As she drank the bitter dregs, these were the words that I heard, "Should ye be utterly unpunished? You shall not be unpunished, for I will call for a sword upon the inhabitants of the earth, says the Lord of hosts." Jeremiah 27:29. When the cup was withdrawn from the lips of the Statue of Liberty, I noticed the sword was missing from the cup, which could mean but one thing. The contents of the cup had been completely consumed. I knew that the sword merely typified war and destruction, which is no doubt on the way. Then, as one drunken on too much wine, I saw the Statue of Liberty become unsteady on her feet and begin to stagger and to lose her balance. I saw her splashing in the gulf, trying to regain her balance. I saw her stagger again and fall to her knees. As I saw her desperate attempts to regain her balance and rise to her feet again, my heart was moved as never before with compassion for her struggles. But as she staggered there in the gulf, once again I heard these words, "Drink ye and be drunken and spew and fall and rise no more because of the sword which I will send among you." As I watched, I wondered if the Statue of Liberty would ever be able to regain her feet, if she would ever stand again. And as I watched, it seemed that with all her power she struggled to rise and finally staggered to her feet again and stood there swaying drunkenly. I felt sure that at any moment she would fall again, possibly never to rise. I seemed overwhelmed with a desire to reach out my hand to keep her head above water, for I knew that if she ever fell again, she would drown there in the gulf. Then, as I watched, another amazing thing was taking place. Far to the northwest, just out over Alaska, a huge black cloud was arising. As it rose, it was as black as night. It seemed to be in the shape of a man's head. As it continued to arise, I observed two light spots in the black cloud. It rose further, and a gaping hole appeared. I could see that the black cloud was taking the shape of a skull, for now the huge white gaping mouth was plainly visible. Finally, the head was complete. Then the shoulders began to appear, and on either side, long black arms. It seemed that what I saw was the entire North American continent spread out like a map upon a table, with a terrible skeleton-formed cloud arising from behind the table. It rose steadily until the form was visible down to the waist. At the waist, the skeleton seemed to bend forward towards the United States, stretching forth a hand towards the east and one toward the west, one toward New York and one toward Seattle. As the awful form stretched forward, I could see that the entire attention seemed focused on the USA, overlooking Canada, at least for the time being. As I saw the horrible black cloud in the form of a skeleton bending towards America, bending from the waist over, reaching down towards Chicago and out towards both coasts, I knew its one interest was to destroy multitudes. As I watched in horror, the great black cloud stopped just above the Great Lakes region and turned its face towards New York City. Then, out of the horrible, great gaping mouth began to appear wisps of white vapor which looked like smoke, as a cigarette smoker would blow puffs of smoke from his mouth. These whitish vapors were being blown toward New York City. The smoke began to spread until it had covered all the eastern part of the United States. Then the skeleton turned to the west, and out of its horrible mouth and nostrils came another great puff of white smoke. This time it was blown in the direction of the west coast. In a few moments' time, the entire west coast and Los Angeles area was covered with its vapors. Then towards the center came a third great puff. As I watched, St. Louis and Kansas City were enveloped in its white vapors. Then on it came towards New Orleans. Then on they swept until they reached the Statue of Liberty, where she stood staggering drunkenly in the blue waters of the Gulf. As the white vapors began to spread around the head of the statue, she took in but one gasping breath and then began to cough as though to rid her lungs of the horrible vapors she had inhaled. One could readily discern by the coughing that those white vapors had seared her lungs. What were these white vapors? Could they signify bacteriological warfare or nerve gas that could destroy multitudes of people in a few minutes' time? Then I heard the voice of God as he spoke again. Behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turneth it upside down, and scattereth abroad the inhabitants thereof. And it shall be as with the people, so with the priest, as with the servant, so with his master, as with the buyer, so with the seller, as with the taker of usury, so with the giver of usury to him. The land shall be utterly emptied and utterly spoiled, for the Lord has spoken this word. The earth mourns and fades away, the world languishes and fades away, the haughty people of the earth do languish. The earth also is defiled under the inhabitants of it, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore has the curse devoured the earth, and they that dwell therein are desolate. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men are left. Isaiah 24, 1-6. As I watched, the coughing grew worse. It sounded like a person was about to cough out his lungs. The statue was moaning and groaning. She was in mortal agony. The pain must have been terrific, as again and again she tried to clear her lungs of the horrible white vapors. I watched her there in the gulf as she staggered, clutching her lungs and her breast with her hands. Then she fell to her knees. In a moment she gave one final cough, made a last desperate effort to rise from her knees, and then fell face forward into the waters of the Gulf and lay still as death. Tears ran down my face as I realized that she was dead. Only the lapping of the waves splashing over her body, which was partly under water and partly out of the water, broke the silence. A fire consumes before them, and behind them a flame burns. The land is like the Garden of Eden before them, but a desolate wilderness behind them, and nothing at all escapes them. Joel 2, verse 3. Suddenly the silence was shattered by the screaming of sirens. The sirens seemed to scream, "Run for your lives!" Never before had I heard such shrill, screaming sirens. They seemed to be everywhere, to the north, south, east, and west. There seemed to be multitudes of sirens, and as I looked, I saw people everywhere running. But it seemed none of them ran more than a few paces, and then they fell. And even as I had seen the statue struggling to regain her poise and balance, and finally falling to die on her face, I now saw millions of people falling in the streets, on the sidewalks, struggling. I heard their screams for mercy and help. I heard their horrible coughing, as though their lungs had been seared with fire. I heard the moanings and groanings of the doomed and the dying. As I watched, a few finally reached shelters, and above the moaning and groanings I heard these words, quote, "A noise shall come even to the ends of the earth, for the Lord has a controversy with the nations. He will plead with all flesh. He will give them that are wicked to the sword. Behold, evil shall go forth from nation to nation, and a great whirlwind shall be raised up from the coasts of the earth. And the slain of the Lord shall be at that day from one end of the earth even to the other end of the earth. They shall not be lamented, neither gathered nor buried. They shall be dung upon the ground." End quote. Jeremiah 25:31-33. Then suddenly I saw from the Atlantic and from the Pacific and out of the Gulf rocket-like objects that seemed to come up like fish leaping out of the water. High into the air they leapt, each headed in a different direction, but everyone towards the United States. On the ground the sirens screamed louder, and up from the ground I saw similar rockets begin to ascend. To me these appeared to be interceptor rockets, although they arose from different points all over the U.S. However, none of them seemed to be successful in intercepting the rockets that had risen from the ocean on every side. These rockets finally reached their maximum height, slowly turned over, and fell back down to the earth in defeat. Then suddenly the rockets which had leapt out of the ocean like fish all exploded at once. The explosion was ear-splitting. The next thing which I saw was a huge ball of fire. The only thing I have ever seen which resembled the thing I saw in this vision was a picture of the explosion of the H-bomb in the South Pacific. In my vision, It was so real, I seemed to feel a searing heat from it. As the vision spread before my eyes, and I viewed the widespread desolation brought about by the terrific explosions, I could not help thinking, while the defenders of our nation have quibbled over what means of defense to use, and neglected the only true means of defense, faith and dependence on the true and living God, the thing which she has now greatly feared has come to her. How true it has proven that unless the Lord guards a city, the watchman keeps awake in vain. Psalm 127. Then, as the noise of the battle subsided, to my ears came this quotation from Joel, the 2nd chapter. Blow the trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord comes, for it is nigh at hand, a day of darkness and of gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness, as the morning spread upon the mountains, a great people and a strong, there hath not been ever the like, neither shall there be any more after it, even to the years of many generations.
There is hope for believers. The rapture escape is imminent. The playlist has this video and many encouraging personal words from God that prove we are not appointed to wrath. This is an urgent warning vision. Rapture and immediate wrath. Scott is vivid, raw, and honest. My 50 years of rapture study bottom lined in 27 minutes. Be sure and see all of this in the playlist. Are you ready? The evil, duped elite destroying the world even for themselves as we watch. The devil owns them. This has a playlist to the throne of God. Seek him. Press in.
The Lord said to me, I need you to repent before I could show you what I need to show you. Now, God, if this is me, please let me know, because I don't want to be playing games with my mind. If this is the enemy, I rebuke you in Jesus' name, all that. And I didn't get nothing. So then I repeated back, so you're coming back very soon. And he said, yes. And then I said, okay, how soon? Because you say I'm coming soon, but how soon is soon? And he said, it's urgent. But I got to see the catching up. I see the silhouette of the man, and I said, is this you, Jesus? And he said, yes. Arms out were like this in the sky, right? And then he went like this, put his hands down. And you could see through the hands. You could see through the hands, you know, the crucifixion, the nails. You could see through the hands. He said, look down. And I looked down, and all I could see was fire. So I'm like, is this the rapture? And I didn't get an answer. All I remember is just focusing. I said, Jesus, are you telling me? And I repeated it. Are you telling me that when we get raptured, sudden destruction is going to come down immediately? And he said, yes. And then he said, listen. So I listened, and there was screaming, there was crying, there was laughter, the screaming was weeping, guys. Like the craziest stuff was happening down here when we were up there. And it was terrifying. I looked down, and it's just straight orange. There's no blue, there's no green, there's no colors, there's no mountains, it's just red. And he looked at me in the eyes, and went out to touch my face like this and said, welcome home. And I felt I felt everything, and I'm even getting emotional now. I instantly got emotional, and I was on the aerator, and I woke up crying.